But what he's going to do here tonight, he can actually do with a rabbit. So, I mean, he's good. And this is a very unique program. As far as I know, it's not offered anywhere else in the state, especially not in this particular fashion. But basically, Don's going to show us how to take a deer from this state right here that's been gutted and skinned, and how they get that meat off of the carcass, and then prepare it to actually be wrapped and put into the freezer. So it's a pretty neat thing. Like Kevin said, it's informal. So if you have questions, fire away as we're going. And if you have questions for me, game warden questions, you can do those too. I'm going to be here. We're going to get all the meat off of the carcass, and then we're going to take a short break, and then we'll come back and talk about cutting up the meat and packaging it. After that break, I got to take off. So if you have any questions for me that you don't want to ask in front of the group, feel free to find me on the break, and we can talk about whatever. So without any further ado, introduce Don, and he's one of the nicest guys you will ever meet in your life. Anybody here that knows him can attest to that. But he's gonna show us how it's done here.
Thank you. Again, if I ain't talking loud enough, I'll speak up. 50 years and I've still got all 10 fingers, so I can do this and talk too. Started out tonight. I have a little chart. All my tools I lay out. I got a list. I went down the list and I got all my tools. And I got here. I left the chart laying on the bench with my tools. What I'm supposed to say. So I'm kind of lost. But first off, I want to thank the Conservation Department for their confidence in asking me to do this. I've been doing it now for, I think the first seminar I did was in '03. And I do several others. I did one at Crowder last year, and a guy from Republic, Missouri come over a few years ago and asked if I would go to Republic and do one. And I said, yeah, at his church. And I said, yeah. Well, he paints fishing lures. I've got acquainted. He's a good friend. And his church decided they didn't want a bloody old deer in. But he does it for a bunch of pros. The special custom paint job. And a guy called me and asked me if I would come to Merriam, Arkansas and do a seminar. And I said, well, yeah, I guess I would. I said, where is Merriam? He says, the best way to tell you of a night, you can see the lights of Memphis. So it was after deer season in December, and I thought, we need a vacation. So we took off, and I've been all over Arkansas, all over the country doing these. But I enjoy it. I never charge anything. I could probably do this for Bass Pro or Cabela's and make money. But to me, I grew up in the outdoors. I've hunted as a kid. We shot squirrels to eat. I've fished. And this is payback. This is what I owe. If I can help someone with something like this is why I do it. I'm not a speaker. I'm a nervous wreck. Tonight I'll wake up in the middle of the night. Why didn't I tell them about so-and-so? So, again, if there's any questions. Now, Adam pretty well touched on what we're going to do, the seminar, take the break. First off, tools I want to touch on. I recommend that you go to Hobart or Joe Harding and get a regular boning knife like you would use in the butcher shop. These are a little bit flexible. You say, well, I've got a hunting knife that's sharp. I can do it with my hunting knife. Yeah, I like to use a comparison. My mechanic can overhaul my old truck with a crescent wrench and a pair of pliers. But it's not the right tools. This just works so much better. I have a steel. It doesn't sharpen the knife in the sense of cutting the metal. What it does, as I'm pushing this knife on the bones, if you looked at it with a magnifying glass, it would look like a sardine can. I roll the edge. So what this does is whenever I come down, and don't hold it like this. It's not designed to be held. I did learn that years ago, and I just grabbed it as a habit. But what I'm doing is this straightens the edge of the knife. This is a handy tool. This meat hook that some guys use it a lot to bone with. I use it to lift a soft carcass of deer. You can use a hatchet and do the same thing with it. I'll chop the ribs off. We'll split the pelvic bone with it. When I started cutting meat 50 years ago as an apprentice, this was one of the tools that I had to have. It's a regular meat cleaver. It's probably a collector's item now. This tool you could use your hunting knife for. I skin enough deer that I've seen this at the trade show at the taxidermy, and it was cheap, and I bought it. It's a skinning knife. It works real well. It's something that's not, it's handy. This is a regular meat saw I bought from Koch last year. Unless you're doing a lot of deer, I don't recommend it. This thing sold for 60 bucks. Hand saw I used for a long time. A hand saw will do the same thing, but it's real handy to saw the leg bones, to cut the brisket and cut the bones off. It is a good tool to have if you're doing a lot of deer. Well, I consider if you do enough for friends and what have you. I guess at this time I should get to work. To speed things up, we have Adam already come in and he boned half of it out already. So that it's the same principle of doing this. Now, I'm not going to do it tonight, but if this deer is a roadkill, and that's what I like to do is a roadkill, because I froze this deer and thawed it out, and it's not edible. And I hate to do a deer that's been shot and wasted, because it's just not handling it and warming it up and everything. But if I were going to process this deer to eat, after I've hung it up, and all I want to do is hang a deer up, is chill it enough that the meat is chilled out. It doesn't have to hang for a long period and age. But even a day or two of chilling, it's going to have dark, it's going to turn dark. And if I'm going to eat this deer, before I ever start to boning it, I'm going to do a little bit of this to give you all an idea. And this dark will be strong. I'm going to trim and this is something that's just a time-consuming thing, but y'all can kind of see how much lighter, and this is what gives your deer a gamey taste and makes it strong. So I recommend taking your time and trimming the dark out. Now, the method that I use on this is I start in and literally go up the bones and take the bone out. Adam boned this, and I usually do it differently, but he didn't want to show this off. this is the front leg on the other side. It just lays like so. I disjoint it, as you can see how this will work. Y'all could probably do it easier than, but it's easier for me to start in and just completely take each joint apart at a time. Anytime you have any questions, holler.
One of the things that he mentioned there about about trimming the dark off and the strong taste, that's really kind of one of the reasons that this program came to be in the first place. That, and back in the early 2000s, when some of the other states were starting to see some of the chronic wasting disease, that disease is located completely within the spinal cord and the brain of the deer. So by boning the meat out, you would never have to worry about the chronic wasting disease, because it's not in the meat. So that's kind of one of the reasons that this thing started. But it gives you the opportunity to learn how to do this to where you have complete control over the meat that goes in your freezer, as far as how it's taken care of, and what goes into the meat that you grind, and all that kind of stuff. We have some great processors around here, but just part of the processing business, they don't have the time to be able to process, each deer completely individually, to where every pound of meat that you get back, like especially in your burger and stuff, may not necessarily be all your meat. So if you did a great job taking care of it, and the next guy did not so much, it may taste a little bit different than, if you process it yourself. And then of course there's also the money issue. You can save quite a bit of money once you learn how to do this yourself, because pretty much, once you've bought the tools to do it, for each deer, you're pretty much buying some freezer paper, some freezer tape, and, then if there's anything else you want to add to your meat, you can get that. But there's not a whole lot of cost involved with it, and makes it a lot more cost effective to do it.
Thank you, Adam, that's the part I done forgot.
Between two of us, we want to remember some stuff.
There's almost, I say, the good Lord drew us a line. There is a little seam, see this line where the shoulder blade is? There was a line right here on this hind leg. I better say it now while I'm thinking about it. There's a line right there, that'll run right along that bone. And that's basically what I try to do is just run the line.
And when he goes to the part about how to cut up the different cuts and all that kind of stuff, he'll also be telling you, this is good for stew meat, this is good for roast, this is good for burger or steaks or whatever. So he'll cover all that here in just a little bit. So this is just pretty much kind of showing you how to get the meat off of the bone.
I think that it is easier to get this deer, the cuts that, by boning it in a chunk instead of taking this shoulder. A lot of guys will pull this shoulder up and just seam it and pull it off. By having it in one piece and by cutting it this way, it's easier to get it. It lines, like the little chart there, it lines it up and makes it easier to get the cuts rather than just chopping it off the bone.
You have less wasted.
Yeah. After I've got the front leg out, the bone off of it, then I'm going to just start in it here on the rib cage, on the briskets, and just start to run him right down the bone to the ribs.
Don, is it easier to cut them up like that when you're laying down or hanging up?
That's a good question. I have always, all the work that I have did has been on a meat block in a retail meat shop. The boners that bone boneless beef cattle, they always work hanging on a rail. And gravity, they start in with hind leg, and gravity, the meat comes down and it comes off easier. It's easier for me because I wouldn't have worked start on boning one. I'd be just as lost as y'all are. But the guys that bone, especially like utility cattle for hamburger meat, they bone on a rail and they can bone a carcass out, just make the meat fall off of it.
Everything that I've learned from Don, so I've always done it this way too. I've had to quarter a few deer hanging, and for me, gravity always works against me because I want him dropping stuff on the ground. So here, if something slips out of your hand, at least it's falling on the table, and so that might be something else.
When he said quartering the deer, remind me of something about about left out. If you have a deer, and it's Missouri, it's 70 degrees through the day, and you're gonna have trouble chilling this animal out, the best way to break it, and this is the way pigs are broke down. You can break this down and put it in bags and put it in your fridge. Go in from the first rib and count 5 ribs. And then break it right there, cut it off. That will, whenever they're cutting pork up, this will be the shoulders, the shoulder blade, they cut it across there. This would be the picnic. Then your pork loins would be from there to there. And then on the hind legs, they come in at an angle. The pelvic bone's right there. They come in right across the pelvic bone right there. And you can, by doing that, then you could break it down small enough that you could get it in a, stick it in the bottom of your refrigerator and chill it out on these hot days. Now, I have learned something from trial and error about this chilling a deer out because I had to. A friend of mine had one and I didn't have room in the fridge to put it. We have an old fridge in the shop. We hung it, I've got a little carport type of thing out back with 2 falls that we hang our deer up on. And I got a bag of ice. This deer's hanging by his hind legs. I got a bag of ice and laid it right in his, right there. And got another bag and stuck it in his chest cavity. Then I got a tarp. Of course, it's warm enough if you don't do something, the flies would get it. I wrapped it with this tarp real good. That ice did a good job of chilling it, and by usually of a night it will cool down enough that it would cool it down, and that worked real good. If you have a deer that you just have to do something with, you won't have a place to put it, that's a good method to do.
But one thing to remember there is he's doing that with the skin already off. If you do it with the skin on, the skin's gonna hold in all that heat, even though it's gutted and opened up on the other side, it's gonna hold in all that heat from the meat and keep it against there, and it's gonna start to basically decompose. As soon as that heart stops, it's starting to decompose, so it's
And again, I'm a believer, Adam, in getting the skin off. That good Lord created this animal to set out when it was 40 below zero, and that skin holds its body heat in. I want it off as quickly as possible.
while you're working on the neck, you want to tell me about the bell rolls?
Yeah, because I'll forget it later on. When we're cutting it up, the neck meat is usually ground. It has a lot of muscle in it. In the grocery store that I worked at one time, cutting a chuck roast, they used to have the 4 quarters of beef. They had what they call a shroud pin. It was an oak screwer that they stuck in here, and it made that neck hang so as you could get an extra cut of chuck off of there for the 7 bone and all, but it's not a desirable looking cut. We had a butcher come down from Kansas City. He started putting them out, calling them bell roast. And people went to buying them at a different name, chuck roast. So they bought them and tried them. And the flavor is just as good on it, or better, than it was on the rest of the chuck. And I said, how come you call them bell roast? He said, it goes right around the cow's neck where the bell goes. Okay, we're going to take the good part out now. I left the kidneys in there, just, I don't know why. this cut here, when I was working at Dillon's, last time I worked in there, this was, it's what you make filet mignon out of. It's tenderloin. It sells for, they were selling it for, over $20 a pound then. That's for a choice tender. There's a lot of different qualities of beef tenders. There's cow tenders that the guys were boning commercially for, like McDonald's and what have you. They're a lot cheaper than that, but, and it's a wonder I didn't get far because I wouldn't sell them. Told people I wouldn't eat them myself. We'll put this over and we'll cut in it later. There's one on each side, on the inside of the loin here.
Being on the inside of the carcass like that, those muscles don't get used as much. Just go there.
Little muscle, that's probably the tenderest. However, it's not my favorite cut of meat, but it's probably the tenderest cut. It has no fat in it at all.
And tell them about the peach and how you cut meat from
I didn't hear.
tender meat.
She said, tell them how you can tell whether or not it's gonna be a tender piece or not, but
Yeah, well, usually I do that later, but that's a good, I'll probably forget it later. Lois used to get plumb mad at me whenever I tell it. But if you're in doubt, if you don't know whether it's gonna be tender or not, if you know where it's at on your body, pinch it. If it don't hurt, it's gonna be tough. If it hurts, like your loin, middle of your back, that's the tender, that's the loin. It's gonna be tender. This is the leg, the outside of the leg, you pinch that, and you can kind of see the muscle on it. There's a lot of, it's going to be tough if you pinch it. So you kind of know it's going to be tender, what to make steaks and out of and what have you. And we'll touch on that a little bit more as we go here. Again, I can't stress enough, this will always turn real dark here. And I can't stress enough, and I'm not trimming it because of time, but I'd be sure and trim that real good.
you can, the dark stuff that he's talking about, the trimming off, you can do a lot of trimming and not lose a lot of meat. And
Right.
what little bit of meat that you lose is totally worth it, because if you kept it on there, it's gonna make your stuff taste strong, and a lot of that is where people, you know, you talk to them, they say, oh, I don't like deer meat, I don't like how gamey it is, and stuff like that.
I should have did this first. This is something in my chart. This is something that I have mixed feelings about. This tarsal gland, I remember. I didn't have to ask Adam what it was. I usually have to ask him what it is. A lot of people's theory is we got to cut that out as quick as deer falls over. I don't think so. There we go, thank you. What I do think though is, and this was a doe and it's not very strong. I always cut them out before I start to skin the deer. The old Bucks, he urinates on this, and some of them you can smell it for a long ways off. It's strong. And my theory is you get this on your knife, you get it on your hand, you go skinning this deer, you rub it on the deer, yeah, you can make the deer taste strong. So before I start skinning, the first thing I do is cut these out. I go wash my knife and my hands. I don't know, that's kind of maybe it's just my theory, but I think in a lot of cases that's what it is. I want to cut this leg off too, how this falls. That's a good tool. It's an expensive tool, but I do enough deer for friends and all, and it's worth having.
Don touched on it a little bit at the beginning, when he talked about not hanging the deer a lot. You know, it's kind of a little bit of a myth that you need to hang your deer for a bunch of days and all that kind of stuff. These deer don't have the fat on the outside, the layers of fat that a beef does. You can do that with beef because they've got that protective layer on the outside. These deer are so lean that if it's possible to age it, but to actually
See
age
that
it
little
and have
streak right there? That's where that joint is.
have it do anything, it has to be in a very, very controlled atmosphere, like in a cooler, just above freezing and all that kind of stuff. And most of the time, we don't have those kind of facilities to do that, so best bet is to get it chilled out and get it boned out.
Usually these joints are just easy as pie to hit. That one's giving me a little trouble. And again, this is not necessary. You could just go right on up the leg. But it's easier for me to take them off as I go. Now, see the line right here? That's the line that runs right up where that.
He's following that bone with the tip of his knife there. As
Yeah.
it goes up through there.
Something else I left out. Usually, boning, you'll probably use, you should use about that much of your knife in most of the time. I don't know whether you've noticed, but that's about how much of that knife. See there, just out of habit, that's what I heard that knife crunching against that bone then. I probably lower the edge a little bit. There's his knee joint come out. Y'all awful quiet. You have any questions?
You were talking earlier before the class about how they used to hang them for like 14 days or so. If you have a place to do that, do you recommend doing that?
No, I don't on beef, on the deer. I would on beef, but a deer doesn't have the fat covering like beef does, and you have to trim so much of it away. I might hang a deer for 3 or 4 days. You know,
Is it just tenderizing it? Is that the
that's
advantage?
what it does. It breaks, a beef, they used to say, would lose 5% of its weight the first week that hung in the cooler. That's why they don't hang them. One of the reasons they don't hang them anymore, they kill thousands a day, they'd have to have such a large cooler. Plus, beef go to the market a lot younger now. They're not, there used to be a cow butchered at 4 or 5 years old. Probably at 2 years now is when they go to market. So they're actually tender, younger and tender. Armour come up with a deal a few years ago that was a great idea. They were trying to figure out a way to hurry up and age them. And basically it just gives you an idea of what aging does. They would process a beef, put it in the cooler, and chill the unit down to 35 degrees, the side, take it out of the cooler, and put it in an oven, and heat it up to about 90 degrees for a while until it was almost to the point of spoiling. And then they would cool it back down. That worked. That was like aging it for 2 weeks. It broke down the molecules. But when the butchers got it and they cut it up and they put it in the meat case, the next day it turned black. It wouldn't hold up in the case. Bacteria, I guess, I don't know, but it was a good idea, but it didn't work.
Well, I know when we were younger, we would hang beef. They would get kind of a greenish cast
Right.
to the meat.
You-
And of
you-
course, you could scrape that off.
You
or
trim
cut it
that.
out.
If it had good fat cover, the fat would keep it from aging. Some of the grocery stores, Thriftway, in the good old days when I worked there for Havens on 7th in Florida, we had had some restaurant people that, they paid a premium for T-bones. They would come in and they'd pick a T-bone and we'd hang it, we'd put it back in the cooler and let a loin, a beef loin, which is, the loin is this part here where this, when you eat a T-bone, you get this little tenderloin and the loin strip. They would hang that for another 2 weeks. And when we'd get it out to cut it up for them, it'd have about that much mold on where it was broke down. And you just cut a thin, maybe that much of it off, and it'd be a pretty pink meat, and boy, it was good. It was top quality. He got a top price for it, but we did that for quite a while. And I'm whittling, I'm not getting no place. Am I doing it right?
Yep.
I'm afraid I'm cutting it too. There, I bet. Now we're going. They're gaining on it. The reason Adam's helping me on this, I told him I needed to learn it. I like a couple of years of being 80. He's gonna be doing this one of these days for him. He does a good job. He can do it right now as good as I can. See what we got here. Yeah, there's my side that's hanging up. Need to be on the other side, so I'm cutting back that way. Like Adam said, I am showing off here. Normally, if I were processing this deer at our house, I would have just cut one, when I got to 1/2, I would have cut the half off. Leave that up where they can see it. I'd cut the half off like that and not wrestle the whole thing. But here we go. It's all boneless.
So basically, he took the meat off the entire carcass and left it in one piece, and he can do
Yeah.
that with the rabbit.
And yeah, I can do the same thing with the rabbit. But what's the point that it makes it easier to do the roast. Here's the loins, the rounds, the hind legs. It makes it easier to seam them out. At this time, why, I think we'll get up and stretch your legs, and Kevin has a video on field dressing, and come up and ask questions, look at it.
One thing I'll say real quick before we go, I work with an organization here locally called Peterson Outdoors Ministries, and we've got 10 or 11 servicemen coming in that were wounded in combat for a special deer hunt. And as part of that event, we do a big banquet, and we cook deer kebabs, deer chili, fried catfish, all that kind of stuff. So right now, if anybody's a bow hunter, I'm needing some deer. So if you want to go out and fill an extra doe tag and donate it, let me know, and I'll tell you how to go about doing that. But it's a good event here locally that really helps people out. So
You feed what, 1,000?
no, not that. It's usually about 300 or
yeah.
something like that.
Yeah.
Is what we usually plan for, but you kind of never know.
He spends hours preparing this. Last year, I know, he counted the individual kebabs. He had 3,000 kebabs, pieces of kebab meat, and they are just,
And then Kevin and a bunch of other people come the night of the thing, and we bacon wrap
They all cook
each
them,
piece
yeah.
of meat and grill it. So anyway, anybody got any questions? General questions?
What about wearing gloves?
That's a good question.
Good question. I wear gloves at the house. One of the safety things I left out, I don't know why, and I recommend it. I can't do it, but when we were working at Dillon's, Oshie had us wearing a Kevlar glove, and this thing, I've been chicken. I never have one to cut my finger with it to see if it worked. I guess it does, but they also have these at Hobart's or Joe Harding's, I think, Restaurant Supply. And you can wear them on your opposite hand that you're boning with. Could save you a good cut.
And we do typically wear regular latex gloves or whatever, whenever we're processing stuff for food. Especially when we're going from, like he said, you know, you can put a pair of gloves on, cut the tarsal gland off, throw it away, take the gloves off, clean your knife, put a new pair of gloves on, keep going. We typically do wear gloves, but when this thing, you know,
One of the worst cuts I had. And another thing that I failed to bring out, these tools are designed to cut meat. Your hands, your body is meat, and respect them just like that. A guy brought a deer in, a bow killed him, one mounted, and I was gonna skin it for him, and he'd shot it the night before, and he said, "Is it good?" And I said, "Well, we'll see." And I was being careful. I was skinning it. I don't know what I did, but the knife slipped. If I hadn't had a bone there, I wouldn't have had that thumb. But that was the next day after I did the little safety talk here.
All right, we'll take about 5 minutes, stand up, stretch, go up and ask any questions, and I'll start the video in about 5 minutes. I do apologize, won't be able to sit, you'll be able to stand and stretch while we're watching the video, but it's only about 5-6 minutes long. And then if you have questions, you can ask questions about the video versus how Don field dresses a deer, and then we'll get into on the second half, and he'll cut all that up and show you what the cuts and how to put it in your freezer and package it up.
Come down here, it's about right here, and then I started.